Americans love scenery. We want to see it all, from one coast to the next, Mount Rushmore down to the Everglades. So hop into a Chevy Malibu and take the scenic route. It's the car you knew America could build. There's a place where people count on friendships they can trace back generations, where they can count on the same stool at the coffee shop waiting for them every morning. This place is called Glen Ellen, and you can find it in every bottle of Glen Ellen wine. This is craft brewed Herman Joseph's, the smoothest, easiest drinking specialty beer in the entire solar system. And I believe you'll find drinkable in the dictionary right after don't order a beer you can't drink. Zoingo! Boingo! The freestyle pogo with more boing, more bounce. Bounce further, bounce higher with Zoingo Boingo. To see what makes Arrowhead Mountain Spring water different from those other waters, you have to go back to the source. And with Arrowhead, that means going back a little farther and longer than most. Between security challenged and security strengthened, there's one important word: how. And it is the how that makes all the difference to our nation and our world. Lockheed Martin. We never forget who we're working for. What makes Kraft Singles so good? 2 out of every 3 kids don't get the recommended amount of calcium. But with Kraft Singles, they get a good source of calcium and the taste they love. Kraft Singles. Magic every single time. Throw boring overboard with a new real meal from Long John Silver's. A meal worthy of a plate, just $4.99. Only at Long John Silver's. We may not all be geniuses, but we can all do something smart. Introducing the Hyundai 199 Sonata Lease. It's a smart deal on a really smart car.
My grandma was a tough lady. I remember I just turned 6 and she took me to one side. She said, "Simon, be careful. People will always hate the Jews." And I remember thinking so clearly, why can't you just say happy birthday?
Good morning. It's Saturday, Rules Saturday, September the 6th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have no free lunch, motivation, meditation, and the anti-industrial revolution. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David Bahnsen.
I should regret very much to have you miss the glorious feeling of accomplishment, and I know you are not going to let me down. Remember that often adversity is a blessing in disguise, and is certainly the greatest character builder. Charles G. Koch. What is true of our personal lives is true of the economy, that in overcoming difficulties, we become more resilient, more capable, and more productive. Unless one believes that resilience, capability, and productivity are bad things, we ought to embrace the character and progress that comes from adversity, from transcending failure en route to a more approved outcome.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for anti-radicals. Top 10 things to understand in dealing with leftists. Number 1, everything is political. You just want to watch football. Leftist football players politicize the sport by kneeling to protest our national anthem. The propensity of the left to regard everything in life as politics is why large corporations are now woke, and why supposedly beloved talk show host and comedian Ellen DeGeneres instantly became, in the words of one tabloid, the most hated woman in Hollywood, when she had the audacity to befriend former President George W. Bush. Absolutely everything you do will be seen by leftists through a political lens. Act accordingly. That doesn't mean changing your behavior to placate them. It simply means being prepared for their faux outrage. 2, language controls the debate. Leftist lexicon is a battle tactic. The left creates phrases which are deliberately flavored to achieve political objectives. Gun violence isn't about violence. It's about guns. Gun safety really means gun ban. Inclusiveness means excluding anyone with competing views. Their goal is to insert their politically charged lexicon into common experience as a Trojan horse for their intended objectives. If you adopt their language, you cede the battle before it has begun. I routinely say, quote, I reject the phrase gun violence because it implies that death by stabbing, bludgeoning, or improvised explosive device somehow better than death by gun. If you were really interested in saving lives, you would be working to stop all types of violence, unquote. 3, to leftists, words are merely bludgeons to secure obedience. Just as leftists use flexible ethics, so too they use flexible words without fixed definitions. Theirs is a world in which racist can be levied at Abraham Lincoln, and offensive is something you say, even when a leftist freely uses exactly the same word. Because they regard every means at their disposal as a potential weapon for securing your compliance with their agenda. Words become bludgeons for their obedience. That's why words like racist, hater, and sexist are so popular with leftists. They have no fixed meaning, and when levied, force you to defend yourself instead of pressing home a rational argument for which the leftist has no answer. Said Daughtry and Castleman, racist is liberal for you're not making me happy and I hate you. Sexist is liberal for you're not making me happy and I hate you. Hate monger is liberal for you're not making me happy and I hate you. Greedy is liberal for you're not making me happy and I hate you. And before we go on to number 4, I wanted to say that all of these words are actually words that they use as substitutes for the words right and wrong. Mainly wrong, of course, because they cannot use those words because there's no right or wrong or any type of hierarchy in socialist paradise. Number 4, expect name calling. When they lack a cogent argument, leftists respond by calling you racist, sexist, a hater, a misogynist. And it's not because they lack a cogent argument, it's because they cannot, again, use the word wrong or bad. They refuse to use it. Listen carefully during the course of the day. See how many people use the word wrong or bad, or better, worse, better, best, good, better, and best, bad, worse, worst. Number 5, expressions of altruism are rarely altruistic. You routinely hear leftists profess their benevolent goal to save the planet, end racism, or minimize our carbon footprint. Unfortunately, when they say, I want to save the planet, what they really mean is, I'm a better person than you are, give me more power. And you can ask the left that. I do that routinely. Europeans that I run into on a regular basis will, in Europe we do this, and in Europe we do that. We don't do this or that or the other thing. And I always say, so you're better than us, right? And again, you get the blank stare. So do the same thing here. If you get a lefty that's going to tell you about saving the planet and whatnot, ask them. That's because you're better than I am, right? Number 6, to the left, ends justify any means. Straight from the Alinsky Handbook, their lofty goals to them justify any crime. For example, as demonstrated not only by rioters but also by Democrat local governments in the 2020 riots, there is no life they will not destroy, no city they will not render uninhabitable in their quest for the great socialist utopia. Similarly, opposition to voter ID and advocating massive mail-in voting cannot be viewed by any reasonable person as anything more than an attempt to increase voter fraud by groups that support Democrats. 7, cognitive dissonance is alive and well. Because leftists think emotionally rather than rationally, they're able to simultaneously entertain utterly contradictory beliefs to a far greater degree than others. That is what enabled leftists to insist that businesses must remain closed during the coronavirus pandemic while simultaneously blaming Donald Trump for high unemployment. It allowed leftist Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler to blame the federal government presence in defending the Marco Hatfield Federal Courthouse for riots which stretched on for months. 8, double standards rule the day. Hypocrisy is a leftist's stock in trade. Let's see, some of it results from cognitive dissonance, but most of it is an exercise of ends justify means. That's what allows Barack Obama engineer both fast and furious gun smuggling to Mexico and possibly the Russian collusion hoax to keep a straight face while calling Donald Trump lawless. 9, expect preemptive accusation. In psychological projection, one unconsciously ascribes one's own fears, anger, anxiety, or duplicity to another person. With the left, it's quite conscious, and it was probably learned from the Soviet Union, which during the Cold War made art of accusing the U.S. of doing exactly what it was. Being the first to make an accusation insulates the accuser, who is actually doing acts of which he accuses others. In 2020, for example, Democrats worked hard to steal the election while simultaneously accusing Donald Trump of planning to steal the election. 10, contrary to popular opinion, you and your opponents do not have common goals. Everybody wants a better America, right? Wrong. Your goal is to improve the society in which your children live. Theirs is to tear down our existing society and create the great socialist utopia they envision. Therefore, in yet another exercise of Alinskyism, the only way to achieve their societal goal is to destroy existing society, your society. In the 2020 riots, Antifa actually cheered the death of innocents, and BLM had nothing to say about gang violence in Chicago, killing black children. Why? Because in their eyes, both were acceptable prices to pay for creating the great socialist utopia. And those were the 10 things to understand in dealing with leftists. And so far in this book, the author has shown a lot more prescience than most of the other authors that I have read. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for retrogrades.
Rule 8. It is a damnable lie that humility disallows Christians from standing up for what they believe in the cultural and political forum. The requirements of Christian piety do not include the forfeiture of hallowed ground to the Jacobins. On the contrary, humility and piety require the God-fearing defense of culture. One humbly submits oneself to the crusade. In reality, humility explicates a certain disposition, not a certain act. As Aristotle wrote of all virtue, prudence, not humility, governs the Christian exigencies of forming real-time, daily rejoinders to the radical enemies of culture and civil order. If anything, true humility empowers retrogrades to fight evil in their midst. In other words, we are allowed, and in many cases even obligated, to fight back if necessary in word and in deed. Many cowardly Christian men on the right wing have made, from their quietude, a comfortable, unchallenged life for themselves. Through a cleverly perverted sense of Christian humility, such men have unabashedly popularized their habitual submission to radicals. They even presume to lecture American retrogrades about the virtues of their own complacent acts of pusillanimity. We must suffer the slings and arrows of this world in stoicism, they say, as they profit in peace, dodging any real suffering while the rest of us fight. What they're really avoiding is the suffering itself. To be sure, such phony conservatives have acquitted themselves very poorly in the defense of Western civilization because they don't care much for it except in what it can do for them. And this attitude reflects the opposite of humility. This attitude is really self-service and cowardice, dressed up in the moral garb of bourgeois Christianity, fake Christianity. This rationalization has grown in popularity to the extent that many earnest retrogrades ask, is resisting evil with good evil? Of course not. We respond to those who have characterized metaphorical draft dodging as brave humility with Isaiah 5:20. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Also recall the sage advice of St. Jerome. Nothing is more to be feared than too long a peace. You are deceived if you think that a Christian can live without persecution. He suffers the greatest persecution of all who lives under none. A storm puts a man on his guard and obliges him to exert his utmost efforts to avoid shipwreck. Note Jerome's spiked words of alarm, which fustily enjoin the Christian to put up his guard and to spend his utmost efforts on the fight. St. Jerome invokes neither pacifism nor passivism. Finally, recall St. Augustine's admonition, hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and courage to see that they do not remain as they are. In actuality, the phony conservatives who mischaracterize cowardice as humility frequently number among the militant mods who would speak out more loudly against retrogrades than radicals. The pious, affected quietude of these Judases is frequently pierced by their own traitors' voices in order to distance themselves from retrogrades. Indeed, the radical imbalance currently plaguing the West has benefited more parties than just the radicals themselves. It works to the benefit of the silent, copacetic Christians who profit from their own non-interference in radical machinations. And this is an ugly fact in the grand scheme of things. In short, pacifism is not humility. Humility constitutes one's attitude at the end of the day, when one hits one's knees in prayer or when the head hits the pillow. But it does not require a retrograde to submit to evil. As Thomas Aquinas points out, humility renders the spirit strong, not weak. Lastly, St. Jose Maria Escrivá wrote, "Unless you mortify yourself, you'll never become a prayerful soul." For gentle-fibered men who would rather be silent than fight, the best means of self-mortification may just be to enter the fray.
And that was Rule 8 from Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left by Timothy J. and David R. Gordon. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, the end of Chapter 2 from, this is Waking the Sleeping Giant. Winning elections will never be enough. The election of Ronald Reagan in 1980 and the Republican victory in the U.S. Senate appeared to signal a rebirth of common sense and resurgence of influence by a political mainstream that had suffered under Jimmy Carter's liberalism. Consider also the national election of 1994 and what appeared to be a tidal wave of rejection of the corruption and abuses of power by the 1960s radicals who came to Washington with the Clintons. Republicans seized both the Senate and the House for the first time in decades. They defeated Hillary Care and reformed welfare. But what certainly looks like the mainstream was in power. The system we read about in our civics books worked, didn't it? In these and other electoral defeats for liberals, the mainstream moved the political pendulum back toward our values and our way of thinking. Didn't we? Nope. The left advance may have been slowed after mainstream electoral victories or even stalled briefly, but they never surrendered an inch of the ground they had captured. The Department of Education, Jimmy Carter's political payoff to the teachers' unions, not only remained intact, but also received more taxpayer money year after year to push the liberal agenda through the textbooks and education policy. Regardless of who was at the tip of the political iceberg, textbooks morphed year after year into thinly disguised indoctrination tools. No federal department or bureaucracy has been eliminated under mainstream administrations, no matter how flagrant their abuse of power or how moronic and wasteful their policies. No leftist judges have been impeached and removed from power for substituting their own political biases for law. Mainstream America will never save our country by winning elections as long as our opponents report on those elections, teach our children, and entertain the public. What we read in the civics books will not save our republic. Brilliant strategy, nasty tactics. The left's long march strategy has proven to be a brilliant one. Because of their dominance of cultural institutions, liberals have, a forum from which they can write the narrative, the terms of political debate. The left's virtual ownership of the news media, the schools, and other cultural institutions allows them to define terms and questions of the nation's politics without even appearing to do so. The liberal minority has depicted the mainstream majority as outsiders in our own country. But the left's ability to affect policy, regardless of who sits in formal positions of power, goes far beyond their ability to shape the terms of debate or to control access to information. Their dominance depends on a second and more disturbing factor. The left has a really nasty side, and they're willing to show it. Liberals have learned that bully usually gets his way, and liberals are willing to get loud, intimidating, and threatening. They're willing and eager to isolate, attack, and demolish anyone who resists their agenda. Anyone who proves inconvenient to them is met with vitriol and venomous attacks. Physical threats and even assaults upon anyone who disagrees with them are ever-present possibilities. But liberal bullying never becomes a news story because the bullies and their allies run the newsrooms. Finally, as we're about to see, the left's long march through our institutions has succeeded because liberals understand the mainstream better than the mainstream understands liberals. The leftist hardliners know how to exploit the decency and maturity of the mainstream to manipulate us. Let's take a look at how they do it. And that's going to be for Chapter 3 for next week, how the leftist agenda has spread. So that was the end of Chapter 2 from Waking the Sleeping Giant. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of motivation.
We're going to focus to develop your skills. A guy was the new owner of a baseball team that was in the basement of the league when he took it over. He went to the picture and he said, "What is your best throw?" He said, "Well, I got a good curveball and I've got a good fastball." And he went on talking about his different throws. He said, "But tell me this, what is your best throw?" He thought for a moment. He said, "I've got a good fastball." He said, "That's all I want you to work on. Nothing else. Just develop your fastball." The next year, they went to the World Series. Most people don't know where their fastball is. Most people go through life never discovering what their talents are. Most people never develop their talents. They have skills and abilities, but if you don't nurture them, if you don't develop them, they will never serve you. Your gifts can take you many places if you develop your gifts.
And that was a little bit of motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a little bit of meditation.
Welcome to this 5-minute guided sleep meditation. This is your time to let go, release stress, and experience deep calm. Find a comfortable position, either sitting or lying down. Gently close your eyes and take a slow, deep breath in. Exhale fully, allowing your body to soften and your mind to unwind. With every inhale, imagine breathing in peace. With every exhale, imagine releasing all tension, all stress, all anxiety. Now bring your awareness to your body. Feel your shoulders relax, your jaw unclench, your chest soften. Let a gentle wave of relaxation travel through your arms, your belly, your legs, down to your feet. Your whole body is becoming lighter, calmer, deeply at ease. In this moment, there is nothing you need to do. Nowhere you need to be. Simply breathe and allow yourself to just be. If your mind wanders, gently return to the breath. Inhale calm. Exhale stress. For the next few moments, rest in this stillness. Feel the peace within you expanding, filling every part of your being. Now take one more deep breath in. Exhale slowly, letting go of the last traces of tension. When you are ready, Gently bring your awareness back to this moment. Wiggle your fingers and toes. And when you open your eyes, carry this sense of deep calm into the rest of your day. Thank you for meditating with me.
And that was a little bit of meditation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now we're going to have the first part of Chapter 3 of Ayn Rand's book, Return of the Primitive, the Anti-Industrial Revolution.
The schools. The cashing in. The student rebellion. The so-called student rebellion, which was started and keynoted at the University of California at Berkeley, has profound significance, but not of the kind that most commentators have ascribed to it. And the nature of the misrepresentations is part of its significance. The events at Berkeley began in the fall of 1964, ostensibly as a student protest against the university administration's order forbidding political activity, specifically the recruiting, fundraising, and organizing of students for political action off campus, on a certain strip of ground adjoining the campus, which was owned by the university. Claiming that their rights had been violated, a small group of rebels rallied thousands of students of all political views, including many conservatives, and assumed the title of the Free Speech Movement. The movement staged sit-in protests in the administration building and committed other acts of physical force, such as assaults on the police and the seizure of a police car for use as a rostrum. The spirit, style, and tactics of the rebellion are best illustrated by one particular incident. The university administration called a mass meeting, which was attended by 18,000 students and faculty members, to hear an address on the situation by the university president Clark Kerr. It had been expressly announced that no student speakers would be allowed to address the meeting. Kerr attempted to end the rebellion by capitulating. He promised to grant most of the rebels' demands. It looked as if he had won the audience to his side. Whereupon, Mario Savio, the rebel leader, seized the microphone in an attempt to take over the meeting, ignoring the rules and the fact that the meeting had been adjourned. When he was properly dragged off the platform, the leaders of the FSM admitted openly and jubilantly that they had almost lost their battle, but had saved it by provoking the administration to an act of violence, thus admitting that the victory of their publicly proclaimed goals was not the goal of their battle. What followed was nationwide publicity of a peculiar kind. It was a sudden and seemingly spontaneous outpouring of articles, studies, surveys, revealing a strange unanimity of approach in several basic aspects, in ascribing to the FSM the importance of a national movement, unwarranted by the facts, in blurring the facts by means of unintelligible generalities, in granting to the rebels the status of spokesmen for American youth, acclaiming their idealism and commitment to political action, hailing them as a symptom of the awakening of college students from political apathy. If ever a puff job was done by a major part of the press, this was it. In the meantime, what followed at Berkeley was a fierce, three-cornered struggle among the university administration, its board of regents, and its faculty, a struggle so sketchily reported in the press that its exact nature remains fog-bound. One can gather only that the regents were apparently demanding a tough policy toward the rebels, that the majority of the faculty were on the rebels' side, and that the administration was caught in the moderate middle of the road. The struggle led to the permanent resignation of the university's chancellor, as the rebels had demanded, the temporary resignation and later reinstatement of President Kerr, and ultimately an almost complete capitulation to the FSM, with the administration granting most of the rebels' demands. These included the right to advocate illegal acts and the right to an unrestricted freedom of speech on campus. To the astonishment of the naive, this did not end the rebellion. The more demands were granted, the more were made. As the administration intensified its efforts to appease the FSM intensified its provocations. The unrestricted freedom of speech took the form of a filthy language movement, which consisted of students carrying placards with four-letter words and broadcasting obscenities over the university loudspeakers, which movement was dismissed with mild reproof by most of the press as a mere adolescent prank. This apparently was too much even for those who sympathized with the rebellion. The FSM began to lose its following and was eventually dissolved. Mario Savio quit the university, declaring that he could not keep up with the undemocratic procedures that the administration is following, and departed, reportedly, to organize a nationwide revolutionary student movement. This is a bare summary of the events as they were reported by the press, but some revealing information was provided by volunteers outside the regular news channels, such as the letters to the editor columns. An eloquent account was given in a letter to the New York Times, March 31st, 1965, by Alexander Grendon, a biophysicist in the Donner Laboratory, University of California. The FSM has always applied coercion to ensure victory. One-party democracy, as in the communist countries or the lily-white portions of the South, corrects opponents of the party line by punishment. The punishment of the recalcitrant university administration and more than 20,000 students who avoided participation in the conflict was to bring the university to a grinding halt by physical force. To capitulate to such corruption of democracy is to teach students that these methods are right. President Kerr capitulated repeatedly. Kerr agreed the university would not control advocacy of illegal acts, an abstraction until illustrated by examples. In a university lecture hall, a self-proclaimed anarchist advises students how to cheat to escape military service. A nationally known communist uses the university facilities to condemn our government in vicious terms for its actions in Vietnam, while funds to support the Viet Cong are illegally solicited. Propaganda for the use of marijuana, with instructions where to buy it, is openly distributed on campus. Even the abstraction obscenity is better understood when one hears a speaker using the university's amplifying equipment describe in vulgar words his experiences in group sexual intercourse and homosexuality and recommend these practices, while another suggests students should have the same sexual freedom on campus as dogs. Clark Kerr's negotiation, a euphemism for surrender, on each deliberate defiance of orderly university processes contributes not to a liberal university, but to a lawless one. David S. Landis, professor of history, Harvard University, made an interesting observation in a letter to the New York Times, December 29, 1964, stating that the Berkeley Revolt presents potentially one of the most serious assaults on academic freedom in America. He wrote, "In conclusion, I should like to point out the deleterious implications of this dispute for the University of California. I know personally of 5 or 6 faculty members who are leaving, not because of lack of sympathy with free speech or political action, but because, as one put it, who wants to teach at the University of Saigon?" The clearest account and most perceptive evaluation were offered in an article in the Columbia University Forum, spring 1965, entitled "What's Left at Berkeley?" by William Peterson, professor of sociology at the University of California at Berkeley. He writes, "The first fact one must know about the free speech movement is that it has little or nothing to do with free speech. If not free speech, what then is the issue? In fact, preposterous as this may seem, the real issue is the seizure of power. That a tiny number, a few hundred out of a student body of more than 27,000, was able to disrupt the campus is the consequence of more than vigor and skill in agitation. This minuscule group could not have succeeded in getting so many students into motion without three other, at times unwitting, sources of support: off-campus assistance of various kinds, the university administration, and the faculty. Everyone who has seen the efficient, almost military organization of the agitators' program has a reasonable basis for believing that skilled personnel and money are being dispatched into the Berkeley battle. Around the Berkeley community, a dozen ad hoc committees to support this or that element of the student revolt sprang up spontaneously as though out of nowhere. The course followed by the university administration could hardly have better fostered a rebellious student body if it had been devised to do so. To establish dubious regulations, and when they are attacked to defend them by unreasonable argument, is bad enough. Worse still, the university did not impose on the students any sanctions that did not finally evaporate. Obedience to norms is developed when it is suitably rewarded, and when noncompliance is suitably punished. That professional educators should need to be reminded of this axiom indicates how deep the roots of the Berkeley crisis lie. But the most important reason that the extremists won so many supporters among the students was the attitude of the faculty. Perhaps their most notorious capitulation to the FSM was a resolution passed by the Academic Senate on December 8th, by which the faculty notified the campus not only that they supported all of the radicals' demands, but also that, in effect, they were willing to fight for them against the Board of Regents, should that become necessary. When that resolution passed by an overwhelming majority, 824 to 115 votes, it effectively silenced the anti-FSM student organizations. The free speech movement is reminiscent of the communist fronts of the 1930s, but there are several important differences. The key feature, that a radical core uses legitimate issues ambiguously in order to manipulate a large mass, is identical. The core, in this case, however, is not the disciplined Communist Party, but a heterogeneous group of radical sects. Professor Peterson lists the various socialist, Trotskyist, communist, and other groups involved. His conclusion is, the radical leaders on the Berkeley campus, like those in Latin America or Asian universities, are not the less radical for being, in many cases, outside the discipline of a formal political party. They are defined not by whether they pay dues to a party, but by their actions, their vocabulary, their way of thinking. The best term to describe them, in my opinion, is Castroite. This term, he explains, applies primarily to their choice of tactics, to the fact that, in critical respects, all of them imitate the Castro movement. At Berkeley, provocative tactics applied not against a dictatorship, but against the liberal, divided, and vacillating university administration, proved to be enormously effective. Each provocation and subsequent victory led to the next. Professor Peterson ends his article on a note of warning. By my diagnosis, not only has the patient, the university, not recovered, but he is sicker than ever. The fever has gone down temporarily, but the infection is spreading and becoming more virulent. Now let us consider the ideology of the rebels, from such indications as were given in the press reports. The general tone of the reports was best expressed by a headline in the New York Times, March 15, 1965. The new student left. Movement represents serious activists in drive for changes. What kind of changes? No specific answer was given in the almost full-page story, just changes. Some of these activists, who liken their movement to a revolution, want to be called radicals. Most of them, however, prefer to be called organizers. Organizers of what? Of deprived people. For what? No answer. Just organizers. Most express contempt for any specific labels, and they don't mind being called cynics. The great majority of those questioned said they were as skeptical of communism as they were of any other form of political control. You might say we're a-communist, said one of them, just as you might say we're amoral and almost everything else. There are exceptions, however. A girl from the University of California, one of the leaders of the Berkeley Revolt, is quoted as saying, "At present, the socialist world, even with all its problems, is moving closer than any other countries toward the sort of society I think should exist. In the Soviet Union, it has almost been achieved." Another student from the City College of New York is quoted as concurring. "The Soviet Union and the whole socialist bloc are on the right track," he said. In view of the fact that most of the young activists were active in the civil rights movement, and that the Berkeley rebels had started by hiding behind the issue of civil rights, attempting unsuccessfully to smear all opposition as of racist origin, it is interesting to read that there is little talk among the activists about racial integration. Some of them consider the subject passé. They declare that integration will be almost as evil as segregation if it results in a complacent middle-class interracial society. The central theme and basic ideology of all the activists is anti-ideology. They are militantly opposed to all labels, definitions, and theories. They proclaim the supremacy of the immediate moment and commitment to action, to subjectively, emotionally motivated action. Their anti-intellectual attitude runs like a stressed leitmotif through all the press reports. The Berkeley mutineers did not seem political in the sense of those student rebels in the turbulent 30s, declares an article in the New York Times Magazine, February 14, 1965. They are too suspicious of all adult institutions to embrace wholeheartedly even those ideologies with a stake in smashing the system. An anarchist or IWW strain seems as pronounced as any Marxist doctrine. Theirs is a sort of political existentialism, says Paul Jacobs, a research associate at the university's Center for the Study of Law and Society, who is one of the FSM's applauders. All the old labels are out, and the proudly immoderate zealots of the FSM pursue an activist creed that only commitment can strip life of its emptiness, its absence of meaning in a great knowledge factory like Berkeley. An article in the Saturday Evening Post, May 8, 1965, discussing the various youth groups of the left, quotes a leader of Students for a Democratic Society. "We began by rejecting the old sectarian left and its ancient quarrels, and with a contempt for American society, which we saw as depraved. We are interested in direct action and specific issues. We do not spend endless hours debating the nature of Soviet Russia, or whether Yugoslavia is a degenerate workers' state, and with sit-ins, we saw for the first time the chance for direct participation in meaningful social revolution. In their off-picket line hours," states the same article, "the PL, Progressive Labor, youngsters, hang out at the experimental theaters and coffee shops of Manhattan's East Village. Their taste in reading runs more to Sartre than to Marx." With an interesting touch of unanimity, a survey in Newsweek, March 22, 1965, quotes a young man on the other side of the continent. "These students don't read Marx," said one Berkeley Free Student Movement leader. "They read Camus." If they are rebels, the survey continues, they are rebels without an ideology and without long-range revolutionary programs. They rally over issues, not philosophies, and seem unable to formulate or sustain a systematized political theory of society, either from the left or right. Today's student seeks to find himself through what he does, not what he thinks, the survey declares explicitly, and quotes some adult authorities in sympathetic confirmation. What you have now, as in the 30s, says New York Post editor James A. Wexler, are groups of activists who really want to function in life, but not ideologically. We used to sit around and debate Marxism, but students now are working for civil rights and peace. Richard Unsworth, chaplain at Dartmouth, is quoted as saying, "In the world of today's campus, the avenue now is doing and then reflecting on your doing, instead of reflecting, then deciding, and then doing, the way it was a few years ago." Paul Goodman, described as a writer, educator, and one of the students' current heroes, is quoted as hailing the Berkeley movement because the leaders of the insurrection, he says, didn't play it cool. They took risks. They were willing to be confused. They didn't know whether it all would be a success or a failure. Now they don't want to be cool anymore. They want to take over. The same tribute could be paid to any drunken driver. The theme of taking over is repeated again and again. The immediate target, apparently, is the takeover of the universities. The New York Times Magazine article quotes one of the FSM leaders. "Our idea is that the university is composed of faculty, students, books, and ideas. In a literal sense, the administration is merely there to make sure the sidewalks are kept clean. It should be the servant of the faculty and the students." The climax of this particular line was a news story in the New York Times, March 29, 1965, under the heading, "Collegians Adopt a Bill of Rights." A group of Eastern College students declared here, in Philadelphia, this weekend, that college administrators should be no more than housekeepers in the educational community.
And that was first part, Chapter 3, from Ayn Rand's book, Return of the Primitive, the Anti-Industrial Revolution. Back in a minute. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.